To my son, I leave only $1. That's how the will began. No explanations, no conditions, just that single line, written in my father's hand, neat, deliberate, and cold, much like the life he'd lived. I read the sentence dozens of times, but its meaning never changed. $1. Not the house, not the bank account, not even the old watch he'd worn for 40 years. Just this single bill, neatly folded into a yellowed envelope, the ink still faintly smelling of something freshly written. At first I thought it was a cruel joke, his final way of asserting control, of ending our long silence on his own terms. We hadn't spoken for years, and now his last word to me was worth exactly $1. But when I unfolded the bill, I felt something strange, a faint trembling, not from my hands, from the paper itself. The note was old, issued in 1923, slightly faded, but in surprisingly good condition. The edges showed faint scorch marks, and the back felt warmer than the air around it. It unsettled me. I held it between my fingers and felt it breathe. Slow, almost imperceptible, like the exhale of something that had been waiting too long. Memories surfaced. My father used to say that true worth wasn't measured in money, but in the weight it carried. I'd never understood what he meant. Maybe this was his final lesson. A symbol of disdain. A way to force me to let go of the past. But when I placed the dollar on the desk and stepped back, something flickered across its surface. I turned on the lamp. A faint graphite line had appeared, running across the signature field. Thin, deliberate, ending in the center of the bill. I touched it with my finger. The surface was smooth, but a dark residue remained on my skin, like the mark of a freshly sharpened pencil. The faint smell of smoke drifted through the room. The silence that followed was thick enough to hear. I could make out the rhythm of my own heartbeat, and beneath it, another, faint but synchronized. Thump, thump, thump. I switched off the light, convincing myself it was exhaustion. Nothing more. But even in the dark, the dollar remained visible. It caught the moonlight and reflected it with a soft green glow, like the eyes of an animal watching from the woods. I turned away, refusing to look at it again, but the feeling didn't fade. There was something behind it, not fear, but expectation, a presence in waiting. That night, I understood only one thing. An inheritance can weigh less than a feather and still drag you down like stone. I woke earlier than usual. Sleep had been fragmented, heavy, filled with that subtle tension you feel when someone stands nearby without touching you. The air in the room was thicker, denser, like the air before a storm. My eyes went immediately to the desk. The bill lay exactly where I had left it, still, calm, motionless. I stepped closer and turned on the lamp. That's when I saw it. The writing had changed. Where yesterday there had been only a faint graphite line, there were now thin, trembling letters forming words. I couldn't read them clearly. The ink was smeared, almost wet. But I knew the line wasn't the same as before. I'm a rational man. My first thought was moisture, condensation, temperature difference, an old bill reacting to the air. I grabbed a notebook and began documenting every detail. Angle of light, room temperature, my pulse. 82 beats per minute, slightly elevated. I treated it all like an experiment, an attempt to prove or disprove my own sanity. I measured the letters, photographed the bill, compared it with last night's notes. They didn't match. The shapes were different. The thickness of the lines had changed. It didn't scare me. Not yet. Until I realized the letters were appearing one by one. Slowly, as if an invisible hand were still writing them. I sat perfectly still, watching. Minutes passed, and before my eyes the ink began to shift. Not smudge, but move. sliding across the surface as though the text itself was making room for something new. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment it changed, but it happened between blinks outside the rhythm of time. The bill was rewriting itself. New symbols appeared in the margins, old accounting marks, maybe dates. I could make out 1958, then 1972, and finally 2025. My year, my date. My heart quickened. I told myself not to panic. Maybe I was projecting fear onto coincidence, finding patterns where there were none. I repeated that thought over and over like a prayer. But the longer I stared, the stronger the feeling grew, that the paper knew more about me than I did about it. I looked up at the clock, 3:11 a.m. When I looked back, the letters were gone. The surface was blank again, smooth, untouched. I ran my finger across it. No residue, no ink. I sat back, exhausted. Logic demanded an explanation, but none held. My eyes kept returning to that ordinary piece of paper, now breathing quietly on the desk. It wasn't an object anymore. It was aware. And by the end of that day, I knew this was no illusion, no trick of light. This dollar lived by its own time. And now, it had begun to count mine. I woke with the feeling that something had been left unfinished. My mind demanded structure, evidence, logic, a system. I needed to trace the bill's origin, if only to understand what I was truly dealing with. In my father's study, there was still a cardboard box filled with family papers, old wills, notarized documents, yellowed certificates. I spread them out across the floor and started sorting. Within minutes, I found a folder labeled in black ink. Westmore, Linea Successoria. It smelled of dust, ink, and age. Inside were lists of heirs dating back nearly 2 centuries. Each name was paired with 2 columns: date of inheritance, the day they received their legacy, and beside it, date of departure. The second column was empty. Every time, I stared at those columns, watching the numbers blur into rhythm. Between every pair of dates, there was always the same interval: 7 days. 7 days after receiving the inheritance, then silence. No letters, no further records, no trace. I began thinking like a detective. I charted their dates, mapped their travels, noted the last known mentions in local archives. Each had disappeared, quietly, completely, on the 7th day. No remains, no explanations. The room felt colder, not from the window, but from within. My heart stayed steady, but underneath the calm grew a slow, undeniable certainty. This dollar wasn't a symbol, it was a mechanism, a part of something much older than reason. I checked the list again. My father's name was the last one. Date of inheritance, April 7th, 2018. Date of departure, empty, and below it, in a different, finer handwriting, freshly added, Leo, April 2025. I froze. I hadn't written it. No one else had touched these papers. And yet my name was already there. The chill that spread through me wasn't fear. It was recognition. A pattern completing itself. This dollar didn't belong to anyone. It passed through us, one by one. Each entry wasn't a record of inheritance. It was a transfer of weight. I stared at my name for a long time, as if by looking I could change its meaning. But deep down, I already knew. The ink had dried long before I opened that folder. When I finally closed my eyes, all I could see was the dollar, resting on the desk, still breathing. And for the first time I thought, it wasn't just waiting. It was remembering. I decided to act methodically. Rationality, the last bastion against madness. So I built a system. The room became a laboratory. Humidity charts pinned to the walls, a thermometer, scales, ruler, camera, and lamps of different light spectrums laid out neatly on the desk. My subject, $1. I set a timer, one photograph every hour, each frame identical, same position, same lighting, same parameters, no deviations, no surprises. For the first several hours, everything remained perfectly stable. The bill lay still, the shadows didn't shift. I even felt a fragile sense of relief, the kind that comes after a long panic, when you finally begin to believe that nothing supernatural exists. But when evening came, I opened the latest photograph, and my heart skipped. In the image taken at 11 p.m., a new line of text had appeared across the upper margin of the bill. It hadn't been there at 10 house, nor at 10:30. It had appeared between frames without any physical interaction. I zoomed in. The text wasn't written in ink. It glowed faintly, like it had been engraved by light itself. I could only make out one word, or rather, a date. April 13th, 4 days from now, exactly 1 week after I'd received the dollar. My breathing grew shallow. I checked the room temperature, 19 degrees C, unchanged, and yet it felt as if it were falling. The air around the dollar thickened, as though the bill was drawing in the space around it, swallowing sound, warmth, and time like a small black hole. I placed it under ultraviolet light, and there, glowing faintly blue, another line appeared, where before there had been only emptiness. Not words, numbers, coordinates maybe, or formulas, but one fragment was unmistakably clear, in crisp capital letters. Registered. I stood motionless, holding the lamp until its light began to flicker. And then I felt it, not in the room, but inside me. Something shifted, a rhythm aligning. My heartbeat pulsed in sync with the trembling of the lamp. I stepped back, but the floor seemed deeper than before, as though the ground had sunk a few centimeters beneath my feet. I checked the scales. The bill now weighed 0.3 grams more than before. Insignificant for matter, but not for something that shouldn't have weight. Something that grows heavier over time, like memory. I kept taking notes, but the letters in my notebook began to blur, spreading across the page as if they refused to be fixed in place. My thoughts fragmented, short bursts of clarity flickering like pulses of light in darkness. And yet, I clung to logic. If the dollar recorded change, then there was a system. If there was a system, there was a law. And if there was a law, it could be understood. What I hadn't accounted for was this. Every record has a cost, and sometimes the one keeping the ledger becomes the next entry in it. My body ached as if I had walked a long road that never existed. The joints pulled tight. The bones throbbed with a faint rhythm that sometimes matched, sometimes diverged from my heartbeat. My muscles felt foreign, borrowed, as though I had woken up inside someone else's body. I tried to rationalize it. Muscle tension, exhaustion, insomnia, stress. Every explanation was valid. Yet when I approached the desk and saw the dollar, I understood the cause wasn't within me. It had changed. The surface was smoother, the edges less frayed, the color deeper, richer, as if the paper was feeding from within. But what struck me most was the warmth. I raised my hand above it, not touching, and felt it pulse. A steady, soft rhythm, like a heartbeat. I placed my palm upon it. The temperature of the bill was a few degrees higher than the air. I measured 26.8 degrees. Then I checked my own pulse, 72 beats per minute, and realized they matched. Perfectly. The synchronization was so precise, it made breathing difficult. I thought of my father, his coldness, his distance, the dry advice he gave instead of affection. His words echoed, "Everything we pass on carries weight, and not all of it can be borne." Back then, I didn't understand. Now I understood too well. This wasn't inheritance, it was debt. A transfer of responsibility. Not for possessions, but for something far older, darker. I could feel it under my skin, in my muscles, in my dreams. Every thought, every movement now circled that fragile piece of paper. I tried to ignore it, covered it with a cloth, locked it in a drawer. But even through the wood, I felt its presence. The warmth didn't fade, it spread, like fire beneath the flesh. By evening, I resumed recording data. My hands trembled, the letters in my journal slanted and warped. Doubt, once disguised as science, had turned into obsession. I couldn't stop. I measured the temperature every hour, listened to my pulse, noted the times when the bill's rhythm shifted. And every time, it matched. Perfectly. As if the dollar was copying me or I was copying it. At one point, I realized I was breathing in sync with the paper. When I held my breath, the pulse stopped. When I exhaled, it resumed. The fear that gripped me wasn't of the supernatural, it was of the logical. If the object responded to me, then it was alive through me. I sat in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat, and for the first time I wasn't sure whose it was. I had always believed that any phenomenon could be measured, if only you found the right instrument. Even the strangest event could be dissected into reactions, pressure, temperature, or changes in light. But this time, logic itself began to fracture, like glass meeting flame. I placed 3 objects in front of me: a mirror, a bowl of water, and an old picture frame with a pane of glass. 3 ways to see the same thing, each with its own reflection. I set the dollar in the center, the axis of the experiment, and began recording observations. At first, nothing happened, only the soft glow of the desk lamp reflecting on the moist, greenish texture of the paper. But when I looked into the mirror, something shifted inside me. It felt as if a thin layer of time had slipped between me and my reflection. Invisible but perceptible, like the faint breath that precedes a storm. In the mirror, the numbers on the bill appeared before they appeared on the real note. I blinked, thinking my eyes were tired, but the next second confirmed it. The mirror wasn't reflecting the present. It was showing what was about to happen. For a fleeting moment, I saw the ink emerge, the letters forming, before they were born on the actual surface. I checked the bowl of water. Its reflections were distorted, blurred, as if I were looking not at the image itself, but at the memory of what had been. In the glass pane, I saw only myself, but altered, paler, thinner, older by several years, with dark shadows beneath my eyes that hadn't been there hours before. Leaning over the desk, I realized it was watching me. I wasn't observing the bill. It was observing me. Everything around it, even the mirror, was merely a conduit through which it saw. I tried to look away but couldn't. The reflection held me, magnetic, unyielding. I could feel my mind resisting, reason straining to hold its shape, but between logic and sensation a crack had opened, and through it seeped another reality. The dollar ceased to be an object. It had become an instrument, not one that unlocked safes, but something that unlocked me. I stared into the mirror, watching numbers form ahead of time, and felt that the reflection's time was running faster than mine. My heart beat slowly, but its reflection, that rhythmic pulse in the mirror, was already racing ahead, like a clock that had begun to outpace its owner. Then I understood, if I kept watching, the reflection would start to live on its own. And when it left the room, I wouldn't be the one leaving. Now I understand. My father didn't slight me. He saved me as much as the terms of the pact allowed him to. That single dollar was not punishment, nor humiliation. It was a shield, thin as a spider's web, stretched between me and something older than both of us. It wasn't inheritance, it was a barrier, the smallest possible transfer, the faintest token, meant to prevent the curse from passing further, while still fulfilling the conditions of a covenant that seemed to reach back to a time when our family had no surname, only a sigil on a seal and the smell of smoke in an ancestral house. I can picture him now, sitting at the same desk where I write these notes, counting not money but days. He must have known the end was coming, yet he had just enough time to write a short will. Not to leave me wealth, but a warning, encrypted in paper. His handwriting on the envelope was more than a signature. It was a seal, a continuation of a chain that could not be broken. In my mind, I begin constructing a chronology, reconstructing the invisible accounting of our bloodline. Perhaps one of the Westmores, or Reeds, once made an exchange. To give something or someone to the dark in return for prosperity, longevity, the continuation of the family. Maybe this dollar is a receipt, proof of an eternal debt, where instead of ink, each heir signs with their own life. Tonight the bill grew heavier. I didn't touch it, yet I felt the faint vibration through the desk, not from wind, not from footsteps, but from an inward pressure, as though the paper itself were expanding, struggling to contain something that shouldn't fit within it. I placed it on the scales, 0.6 grams more than yesterday. This was no longer mere change. It was transformation, the mass of memory. As I walked through the house, I felt its geography shift. The walls didn't move, but the echoes of my footsteps changed tone. The corridors seemed longer, the turns led elsewhere. Mirrors darkened slightly, and the old wall clock, the same one from my childhood, displayed the same minute again and again, as if the entire house were trapped in a single moment, unwilling to stretch itself into time. I could feel it. The repayment had begun. Not through action, not by choice, but as a natural process, inevitable, the settling of an ancient balance that only objects still remembered. Now I understood why no one in our family ever spoke of death directly, why the wills were always brief, why heirs were cautious with promises. We never owned money. We owned debt, and perhaps I'm the last one meant to pay it, because the dollar now breathes in rhythm with my heart, and I am no longer certain which of us sets the beat. The final night never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with darkness, and it begins when everything stops changing. Time holds its breath, space contracts, and even the act of breathing feels unnecessary. I knew then that the cycle was ending. The 6th day had closed, and the dollar lay on the table, heavier, darker, almost metallic to the touch, while the 7th began seamlessly, like a print laid over its twin. The inscription on the bill no longer blurred or trembled beneath my gaze. It didn't fade. It stood sharp, geometric, carved in ink that seemed deeper than the paper itself. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't a message. It was an instruction. Nothing mystical, just a single line, something that could have belonged in a technical manual. Place it where the air grows heavy. I looked around the room, and yes, something in the air had changed. In one corner near the floor, it seemed to thicken, as if the air itself had taken shape, smoke that refused to move, or water holding form. I could feel it on my skin like pressure before a storm, invisible, inevitable. In that spot, sound dulled. Even my footsteps went mute. I understood then. This was a threshold. Not a door in the physical sense, but a line between now and what was. I lifted the dollar. It felt denser, as though it had crossed the boundary between paper and metal, between symbol and weight. When I placed it on the floor, right where the light met shadow, the room changed. There was no flash, no sound, only silence, so profound it carried its own presence, deep enough that I could hear the house breathing. And then, it opened. Not with movement, but with state. The air parted, not outward, but inward, allowing passage into a place where nothing human belonged. The family's memory reached out from the dark, not as ghosts or voices, but as gravity, as a pull toward completion. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't punishment. It was inevitability. Everything in me recognized the moment. It had been waiting through generations. And now, it was my turn to finish what began long before I was born. I stood at the boundary. Before me, darkness, not black, but thick as ink, the kind that holds names within it. Behind me, the house, time, body, reason, everything that could still be called me. I knew that if I stepped forward, there would be no return. But if I stayed, the pattern would begin again. Someone else would find the dollar, relive the same days, the same dread, the same pulse beneath the skin. I could remain and fade slowly, not as flesh but as memory, blurring until it vanished entirely. And then I understood. My father never punished me. He warned me. The dollar wasn't mockery but mercy. A shield that held for exactly 7 days. 7 days of protection from the door that eventually opens for everyone. I looked at the dollar one last time, and it seemed to look back. Then, I stepped forward. The air thickened. The light dimmed, as though sound itself had gone silent. My heartbeat merged with another rhythm, older than me, older than my father, older than the name Westmore. And in that moment, I knew. The debt was paid. I write these final thoughts without emotion, without metaphor, without the need to explain, only to record. This is no longer a diary or confession. It is a closing protocol. Each letter trembles. My fingers are heavier than they should be. But I must finish this. The dollar lies before me. Its surface no longer resembles paper, rather a thin sheet of metal that holds within it the faint imprints of every hand that ever touched it before mine. It isn't money. It's a key. A key to doors that can't be seen but are always near. In the densest part of the air, where time folds into a single point, and sound ceases to exist. I understand the simple equation now. To leave is to disappear. To become invisible to those who still breathe ordinary air. To remain is to carry the debt onward, to allow the next in line to endure the same 7 days again. It is a choice between two infinities, vanishing or repetition. I choose a third option, cessation. I will pass the dollar to no one. I will not hide it, nor preserve it, nor will it be inherited. It will stay here, ownerless, nameless, stripped of the right to move forward, a key without a door, a memory without continuation. The house grows quieter. Even the clock that once ticked endlessly inside its walls has fallen silent. The air has thickened, so dense that each breath feels like movement through water. I know there will be no climax, only silence. A silence heavier than sound, and within it, the meaning of everything that came before. Only now it becomes clear. The tension that stretched from the first sentence was never fear. It was inheritance. A hereditary weight. Sometimes the smallest thing, a crumpled dollar, the scent of old ink, a slip of paper between your fingers, can carry the weight of an entire bloodline.